welcome to everyone attending tonight. It's good to see some people from overseas as well, although most people are from South Africa, which is great as well. I'm Lynette Rodman, and I will be your host tonight, and I'm coming to you live from Grahamstown, South Africa. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in a few days' time. If you've got any questions or interesting comments for Mark to respond to, please type them in the chat box below, and we'll have a question and answer session afterwards. A bit about our special guest tonight. Mark Brown has a PhD in zoology, and for the past 25 years, his research and conservation work has dealt mainly with birds. Mark has worked in academia for over a decade, and he moved over to an NPO. And then after that, and he's currently now in conservation tourism, and I'm sure he'll tell us more about that in his talk. Mark has written over 100 academic papers, and he's contributed to several chapters in books. And he's also co-supervised at least 40 postgraduate student studies. Mark's passion is bringing science to people, and he enjoys public speaking and spreading the word about conservation on social media. And he really does a good job of that, I know, firsthand. Tonight, Mark will be speaking about the sterling work that has been done in the Seychelles archipelago. Work is being done to bring back the Seychelles Warbler and the Seychelles Magpie Robin back from the brink of extinction. And I'm sure Mark will also be telling us about the island restoration program. Mark, we really look forward to your talk tonight. Over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Lynette and Derek, for hosting and inviting me to come and share some of my work with everyone. I'm very excited to do it. So I'm going to quickly try and share my screen and go straight across into the presentation.
Yes,
right, so yeah, I've been privileged to be involved in some research work in the Seychelles since 2010. And it's really that work that I'm going to be sharing with you all tonight. So most of my work occurs on a very small private island, but some of it has a sort of national context for the Seychelles. So I'll be touching on other islands and other aspects of the work as well. But to kick off a little bit about the Seychelles itself, Seychelles is made up of 155 different islands, and it has a relatively small population as a country. It's got just on about 107,000 people, making it the smallest population of any African state. But it is a member of the African Union, and is really a developing nation that's been doing quite well in terms of development and progress, and yeah, in a number of different spheres. So the area itself that I'm going to be talking about is sort of in this gold block over there. And then if you look at the main island of Mahe is the big green one on the map there. That's where you fly into if you go to the Seychelles from anywhere in the world. I then take a small flight to Praslin, which is the secondary or the second largest island over there. And then I take a small boat trip to Cuisine Island in the center of that little white dot over there. And that's where I get to enjoy a bit of paradise and work with some really special birds and other animals too. So this is what the island looks like in its current form. It's 25 hectares in size, so it's not very big. It's about 1.4 kilometers long, about 800 meters wide. And the island owner and the company that runs the island has, as its stated mission, the following. It says to promote and practice nature conservation and the wise use of natural resources of the island and its surroundings, and to share this philosophy with our guests. So the island was taken over by the current owner in the late 80s, early 90s. A full-on restoration program started in 1995, along with most of the conservation work I'm going to be talking about tonight. And then it opened its doors to guests as an exclusive tourism destination in 2007. In 2000, sorry. But since 2007, it's really been awarded amazing awards in the tourism and conservation departments. These include the Indian Ocean's leading ecotourism destination by the World Travel Awards, and in multiple years, the world's leading green destination and the world's leading private island awards, which is really fantastic and a feather in the cap for the team on the island itself. It is literally the textbook example of small island restoration, so much so that a book has been written about it, which was published by some colleagues of mine about a decade ago. And we've carried on the work that they initiated and saw through for the first while since 1995. This is what the island looked like in 1960. It really was denuded of any natural vegetation. There wasn't a scrap of natural vegetation on it. There was some livestock, there were cats, there was coconut plantations which were harvested, and a few other bamboo plantation for basket weaving, and a little bit of agriculture, plowed fields and crops that were grown. It's always been rat-free, which is one of the key starting points for a restoration program. Most of you online will be aware of the immense efforts around the world, especially on places like Gough and Marion, to try and eradicate rodents from islands because they have such a negative impact on biodiversity. Fortunately, cuisine has always been rat-free, and we have very strict protocols of stuff coming onto the island to ensure that we stay rat-free. So some informal restoration work started in the 1980s, a little bit by the government, a little bit by the current owners at the time, but it was really the current owner since 1995 that really kicked off massive rehabilitation work, planting literally thousands upon thousands of trees, removing aliens, and trying to encourage a natural rehabilitation process to occur. By 1998, the island was starting to look a little bit better. You could still see a lot of the remnants of plantations and plowed lands, and that was a little bit of a development now for the tourism aspect. And then by 2007, most of the current infrastructure was already in place. The island was looking a lot better. A lot of wildlife had started building up in numbers again, and a lot of the conservation efforts were starting to pay dividends. And then if you look at it today, this photo was taken aerially by a drone in 2020, but I was there literally about 6 weeks ago, and it's looking just as stunning as in this photo, and a real testimony to hard work, perseverance, and developing a model where conservation and tourism can go hand in hand. But to show you a little bit more sort of graphically what the change in habitat has been like, anything that you see in this map that's red is alien or plantation or cultivated land. Anything in green is natural vegetation, and you can see the distinct progression and the very dramatic progression in the habitat restoration work, which has been really fantastic. So touching briefly on the sort of overall picture of my work there, it's really looking at the long-term influence of climate change on island populations of birds and not mammals, birds and reptiles. And we use island nesting seabirds as one of the target groups because they're one of the groups most at risk globally from global warming. We do a lot of work on turtles. There's 2 species of turtle that breed on the island. We mostly work on the hawksbill turtle, which is critically endangered. And I'll touch just a little bit on the turtle work right at the end of the talk if there's a bit of time, just because even though we birders, turtles are pretty cool. So we can include them now and then. some long-term monitoring of endemic land birds, which I'm going to chat about now, training conservation staff and managing conservation staff on Cuisine and on a few other islands as well. And then on Cuisine itself, I have a contract to manage the staff on the projects and to help source conservation staff when we have staff turnover. So the model the island uses is not necessarily novel, but they've kind of found the sweet spot where it works. So it's using high-end exclusive tourism, low numbers of tourists, but at a very premium price. I could never afford to go as a tourist to this destination, but that's purposefully done because the funds that are needed to run the island as a conservation destination. So the profits from the tourism exclusively fund the conservation work. We currently have 4 conservation staff full-time on the island, 2 with master's degrees and 2 with a wealth of experience, undergrad degrees, and in some cases, decades of experience working on conservation programs around the world. A large number of research programs and ongoing conservation work and ongoing rehabilitation work. And most of the research that I oversee on the island is designed to understand this interaction between the rehabilitation work, population dynamics, and how do we tweak the conservation programs that we have running there to lead to even more benefits for the biodiversity on the island. So I've been very privileged since 2010 to work with a range of fantastic individuals. Each one of these photos are different teams that were in place at the time. When I was visiting during different years. Bottom right is the first couple that I interacted with on the island, Kevin and Sunmarie Jolliffe. I had trained Kevin as a bird ringer in South Africa, and even now 13 years later, my company Discover Eden is sending some experiential learning groups, international students, to a reserve in Zululand where Kevin works later this year, which will be really cool. Julie and Ian are in the top left photo. They were in place when I put a postdoc student on the island. We did some really cool research on seabirds together that I'll show you later. And Julie did a master's degree on the Hawksbill turtle program under my supervision while she was still on the island, which was really fantastic. Then really want to highlight the couple right in the middle there, Stuart and Bronwyn Dunlop. They're fantastic couple. Stuart used to be the tagging officer for Ori in Durban. He was one of my undergraduate students when I was still lecturing at University of KwaZulu-Natal. And they really took the project to a new level and brought in a professionalism and an ability to really add value from a scientific point of view, which not to say the previous guys weren't doing it, but they just raised the bar. And we've been fortunate to keep the bar raised. This is the current team on the island. Couple on the left are Sean and Melissa, and then next to me in the middle is Tammy and Christina on the right-hand side. Christina spent time doing internships with me in South Africa, and also was a very good rehabilitator with Sandcob for many years as well. And then myself, and just between the two girls there is my son, who recently went on his first expedition to the island with me. I have to highlight Lorinda Hart, who is a lecturer in zoology now in Windhoek, but she did some postdoctoral studies with me. One project she ran was on jackal buzzards in KwaZulu-Natal, and the other was on seabirds in the Seychelles. And so a lot of what I'm presenting to you tonight is stuff that I did with Lorinda. My wonderful wife, Kelly, has been onto the island a few times with me. She's also a trained biologist and a bird ringer as well. And we've had a lot of fun interacting and getting to grips with the wildlife in the area. And as I said, my son recently went with me, and we had a fantastic trip. And he's a budding young biologist as well, and really enjoyed it. He got stuck in hands-on on all the projects, and I was very impressed actually to see how he coped with it. But let's jump into some bird work, and I really want to start with saving species from extinction, because the two species that are on the island that literally could have been extinct are fantastic birds to work with. This is the Seychelles Magpie Robin that you can see in the picture here. It's a beautiful, charismatic species, but by the 1960s, the whole population was confined to one island, to Frigate Island. By the late 1970s, only around 16 birds existed on the planet. And thanks to fantastic interventions from BirdLife International, and then more subsequently from Nature Seychelles, the BirdLife partner in the Seychelles, the island program started to try to improve the numbers on frigate, but then also reintroduce the species to some of the other rat-free islands in the Seychelles. So Cuisine was recognized as a possible site for magpie robins, and we were, I think, the third island to get the species. And that reintroduction was done with 7 magpie robins between 1995 and 1996. One died soon after reintroduction, so we had a founder population essentially of 6 individuals, and we're now sitting at 76 individuals on Cuisine Island, which is fantastic. It was downlisted as a species by IUCN from critically endangered to endangered in 2007. And we're now sitting at a global population of closing in on 500 individuals across 5 different islands, which is an amazing success story. And I just want to touch on some of the reasons behind that success in the next few slides. So the first thing just to note is that wherever possible on the 5 islands, every single individual is monitored. It's not possible on Frigate because they've got a larger area with a higher number of birds and not a dedicated conservation team that can work exactly like we do. But on Cuisine, we know where every bird is. We know which territories they belong to. We know when they swap territories. When one bird leaves a family group and joins another family group, they form these sort of cooperative family groups as breeding units. And we know each individual because they are individually ringed. And you'll see the bird on the left has a more traditional color ringing scheme. So it has a metal saffron ring plus, in this case, a light blue coloring. Now, light blue in conjunction with a metal ring indicates the island that it's from. So Cuisine has light blue, Cuisine next door, the closest island to us, they have red as their color. And then a 2-color combination on the other leg, which becomes the unique identifier. The problem we found over the years was these colorings started to fade and get discolored and get brittle and break off. And they weren't always, it wasn't really easy to always identify exactly every individual. So based on work I'd done in South Africa with engraved colorings, we started putting these ones on the right on, which has really led to much higher success of being able to quickly identify your individuals, mostly with a naked eye, pair of binoculars, even a cell phone picture that you just zoom in on quickly. You can read that coloring and confirm the identity of the bird that you're seeing, which is really fantastic. This is a relatively rare photo of an unringed Seychelles Magpie Robin. And every now and again, birds do escape detection when they're breeding, and we get a youngster popping up that we didn't even know was on the cards, or a very wily bird that avoids our traps and nets and goes a little bit of time without being ringed. And it's one of the challenges I face when I do go out every year or two, is to try and assist in trapping the unringed birds. So the good news was this bird got a ring the day after I took this photo. And we currently don't have any unringed birds on the island as far as I'm aware. But they breed and we get new chicks all the time. So every now and again we do get them. So looking at the population status on Cuisine itself, when originally the birds were introduced and some food availability studies were done, the expectation is that Cuisine would really be able to host between 30 and 40 of these magnificent birds. That would be like the carrying capacity. And you can see, obviously, since 2017, we've really exceeded that. And I believe there's two main reasons for that. So number one is we have really reinvented a nest box project, which the birds have taken to really well. They don't always nest in the boxes. They use natural cavities as well. But the nest boxes have definitely made an impact. And I think the secondary reason is that we've just reached a tipping point with the reforestation of the island, where the trees are big enough, the leaf litter is thicker, maybe there's more invertebrates. We're repeating some invertebrate studies at the moment to see if food availability has increased like we suspect. But I think combination of those factors is providing extra nesting opportunities, and the forest really becoming more, taller, more three-dimensional. That's led to this fantastic growth spurt in the last 7-8 years that has really exceeded what we believed the island was even capable of sustaining. So that's really fantastic. Like I said, we know exactly where every territory is, and this is mapped on a monthly basis. And we keep a record every month of the individuals and which family groups they're in, and where the boundaries of those family groups are. And they're relatively well-defined boundaries, and the birds will meet on the territories and talk to each other, and every now and again engage in a little bit of sort of Friday night club indulgence and activities to sort out those territory lines. And obviously, this is all part of the smart Seychelles Magpie Robin recovery team effort. So once a quarter, there's a get-together of the 5 islands to thrash out what's working, what's not working, and plans are afoot to introduce onto a 6th island in the near future, hopefully as well, which is great. The other species, just to highlight from an extinction averted point of view, is the Seychelles Warbler, and that's really the species that Kuzan Island, next door to Cuisine, is really well known for. And it was on Kuzan that by 1959 there were only 26 of these birds surviving in the wild. I've read estimates that it went down to as low as 17 at one stage before habitat restoration efforts were put in place there. The species was saved and then reintroduced onto other islands. In June 1990, 29 warblers were translocated to Cuisine, and we now have roughly 350 to 400 warblers on Cuisine, which is fantastic. Not as big an effort to ring and monitor every single individual. There is a British Seychelles Warbler research team that comes out periodically. They work a lot on Kuzan Island. They have exactly the same as what we have for the Magpie Robins, they have for the warblers there. Every individual is color-ringed, DNA sexed, territories are mapped, whereas we only do that on Cuisine every sort of 5 to 10 years rather. We get either the Dutch Warbler team or the British Warbler team coming out to work with them. Then, the talk is advertised as Seychelles success stories, but obviously not every story is a success story. And in the case of the Seychelles white-eye, which is also restricted to a small number of islands, there was an attempt made in 2007 to reintroduce Seychelles white-eyes onto Cuisine. 20 birds were introduced in July 2007. They did start breeding. We did have some chicks, but it was one of those really bizarre scenarios where a critically endangered bird was affecting a critically endangered bird. So the magpie robins developed a taste for white-eyed chicks, and they ate every single nesting attempt that was made. And I think in 2010, on my very first visit there, I took this photo of a Cape white-eye, and it was the last remaining white-eye of the 20 that had been introduced, and it subsequently passed on as well. So that was a failed reintroduction, but a lot of valuable stuff was learned out of that as well. I want to move away from some terrestrial stuff now and look at some of the seabird work I've been doing on the island. So I'm going to just briefly introduce you to the main characters in the story. and then tell you about some of the work we've been doing, climate change related and habitat restoration related. So this is the lesser noddy. We've had a few celebrity lesser noddies visit South Africa in the last few years, which have got the Twitchers excited. There was one earlier this year in, I think, the Cape Vidal area, and I was actually in the Seychelles at the time that it was there. Callan Cohn was sending me photos and asking me what I thought of the molt, and I was sending him photos of birds I was photographing in the hand at the time and showing him how different the molt patterns were. And it's a really great opportunity to work on lesser noddies on the island, because we have 55,000 pairs that breed on that small 1.4 kilometer island every year. And the noddies, when I was there a month or so ago, were just starting to come back and build nests a little bit earlier than normal. But going into our South African winter time is peak noddy breeding period. They're fantastic birds in huge numbers, make a lot of noise and a lot of smell. So tourists don't really enjoy the island in winter, but I thoroughly enjoy it as an ornithologist. It's just a spectacular place to go. They build these fantastic nests out of decaying leaves, lay a single egg, and will often carry leaves half the size of their body, and do their bit to improve the population. The next species on the list is the brown noddy, a lot more robust and larger than the lesser noddy, but occurs in much lower numbers. So on the island, we fluctuate between about 1,100 and 1,400 pairs that breed, and they breed in 3 different ways. So unlike the lesser noddy that always builds a nest in a tree, brown noddies will either nest in a palm tree, like this pair, on sort of dune crest vegetation, really exposed to the elements, or on the rocks in rocky areas, also really exposed to the elements. And I'll chat a little bit more about that sort of the heat loading aspect of their breeding a little bit later. Very interesting from a brown noddy perspective is there's 2 different colored chicks that you can find. Now the normal coloration of a chick is like this bird in the picture here. It's a dark gray color that molts into the brown plumage, but then you get this very white morph of the chick. And it was quite interesting. We normally only find these white morphs in the really exposed hot environments where they breed. So in the palm trees, there's a lot more shade in that. I've never found one of these white chicks, and I'm not sure if the team have either. And there's obviously some thermoregulatory sort of benefit of being a white chick rather than a dark chick from heat absorption and things like that. This photo really demonstrates what I like to call a petulant teenager pose. And it's really a chick that's just got tired of begging for food, and it's just throwing its toys out the cot completely. So I had to put that photo in. But they really are spectacular birds, very big, much bigger than what you think. And it's been great getting to grips with them. White-tailed tropic birds are just amazing, and I'm going to show you a little bit of stuff later on that will hopefully blow your mind. We've got about 885 pairs on the island. They breed all year round on the island, so unlike the noddies and some of the other species that have very defined breeding seasons, that this bird and the next bird I'm going to show you breed all year round. So tropic birds are very special. They're massive birds, beautiful tails, long serrations on their bills, so they can really give you a neat little nip. They generally nest on the forest floor. They don't really build a nest. They just lay an egg on the ground or in a little sort of divot next to a tree. And they hatch out these cute little fluff balls. They're literally little cotton balls of fluff that slowly start developing into a semi-respectable tropic bird, like this individual here. And then when they start taking flight, they develop into these magnificent flyers that can go hundreds of kilometers looking for fish. The next species is the fairy tern or the white tern. And we vacillate between about 500 and 1,800 pairs that breed on the island. And they also breed all year round, like the tropic birds. And we've recently started noticing a trend in the data which suggests that these fairy terns do breed in slightly lower numbers in winter when all the noddies are around and taking up a lot of the nesting trees and a lot of the sort of island space. And then when the noddies are away in the summer season, then we find a high number of fairy terns breeding on the island. Now they are fantastic birds. I generally don't say I have a favorite bird. I kind of feel all birds are special, but if I'm forced to choose a favorite, this would definitely be in my list of top 10. They're spectacular birds, but they're really dumb breeders. They literally lay an egg on a branch on a tropical island that gets monsoons. And so the breeding success is really low. Eggs and the chicks get blown off the branches more often than not. And you sometimes look at a breeding success of sort of 20% in a season, which is incredibly low for a seabird. But nevertheless, they are stunning birds. There has been an attempt that was developed on the island early on to try and increase breeding success by nailing little coconut husks on branches, and the birds have taken to breeding on them, and I will show you some stats just now about whether that's successful or not. These beautiful blue beaks contrasted on the white feathers and the black eyes just make them really spectacular. The chicks are pretty interesting. They just little fluff balls, but they camouflage onto that branch really nicely. They still get a lot of brooding from the parents, and they slowly start developing. They've got these really large oversized feet to try and help hold on to the branch. Mom will bring them some fish, dad will as well, and they slowly start developing a little bit of their adult plumage coming through till these scruffy looking birds that develop eventually into these magnificent adults that come in sometimes 6, 7 little fish at a time to feed their chicks. There's a chick being fed, and then just a couple of aerial photos for you. They're very inquisitive birds, so we'll often be walking around on the beach or just on the dune edge, and 3 or 4 pairs of fairy terns will just come and sort of glide above you and hover above you and just try to inquisitively see what you're up to. And it's a really special experience. Moving on to wedge-tailed shearwaters, we have about 8,000 pairs that breed on the island. They nest in burrows underground, which means certain parts of the island you've got to be really careful where you walk, that you're not collapsing a network of burrows. Most of the work on them is done at night. If we want to go and ring them, we go out at night with headlamps, and we get to grips with them like that. Beautiful birds. They do come in sort of late evening as it's starting to get close to sundown, and we get the opportunity to photograph them and catch them and study them. We are monitoring nests on the island as well. Yeah, first up, in terms of some of the sort of published research, we recently, a couple of years ago, looked at the population growth since the conservation work started, and looked at how that has started leading to population increases over time with habitat restoration. And interestingly, you'll notice from this graph that the lesser noddy population has not increased over time. It's stayed relatively constant. If anything, maybe decreased a bit. And what's interesting is lesser noddies are less fussy about habitat and breeding. And so even when the island was quite trashed and there was a lot of non-native tree species, they were still breeding on the island. And the transition to indigenous vegetation, they've encountered that relatively well. I suspect the slight decrease is because of the increase in other numbers of other species. So the brown noddy, for example, is more than double the number that it used to be. The white terns are increasing, the white-tailed tropic birds, and the shearwaters have definitely increased over time. So really nice data to show that over time, habitat restoration has led to an increase in breeding seabirds. And if you put this into a global context, almost every single seabird on the planet is in decline. So when you can get a localized population that is increasing, that is regional and in some cases global impact, which is fantastic. I want to touch a little bit on some climate change research now that Lorinda and I did for her postdoc. And you'll see Lorinda here filling some fake eggs with the data logger and some flowers being shown to conduct heat in a relatively similar way to a normal egg with an embryo and albumin. And we would then place these false eggs under incubating birds and measure their incubation patterns. And we do this on the four main bird species, seabird species in different microhabitats, so exposed to the sun, on the rocks, in the trees, on the ground, and that sort of thing. The one thing I failed to mention so far is that you're dealing with birds that have not evolved in the presence of mammalian predators. And so they're relatively tame. And so you can see in this photo, Lorinda literally just lifting up the tail and swapping out the egg. We can often do that with the birds, and even the sort of tree nesting birds like lesser noddies and fairy terns. I walk around with a little hand net and I can catch the birds as they fly past me, because they just don't have that fear of man that you would be used to from a continental perspective or a mainland perspective. There's just a photo of a fairy tern egg on the left and a fake fairy tern egg on the right. Pop it in place and can really record some data. There's a brown noddy that's just swapped over incubation shifts. So the bird on the right is just leaving and the bird on the left is just settling down onto the egg. And we published this work a couple of years ago in a physiology journal, but really showing that nest microhabitat does affect incubation temperatures. And I just want to highlight a few things here. So the graph just shows, this is for brown noddies. It's average data for 10 brown noddy eggs. And you can see just the natural rhythm of temperature on a daily basis in the eggs. And if you look at the table here, I want to just look at the maximum temperatures. Remembering a bird would normally incubate at about 37 degrees. That would be a standard incubation that we would put in an incubator. But an egg dies, the thermal limit for most birds' eggs is about 40 to 40.5 degrees. And so a brown noddy nesting on the dune crest, where it's really exposed, some of those eggs are actually already experiencing critical thermal limits while being incubated, or being disturbed off the adult disturbed off the nest or something like that. And that's really where we start looking at potential climate change impacts on island nesting birds. Apart from things like rising sea levels and that, it's these critical thermal limits in exposed areas that can cause trouble. The nice thing is, just look at the brown noddies nesting in the tree. Their maximum temperature is nowhere near the critical thermal limit. So microclimate choice or microhabitat choice can positively enable birds to adapt to climate change just by nesting in a different microenvironment on the island. Obviously, some of our work, we want to be conservation focused, so we want to look at improving breeding success. I told you the abysmal story of the fairy tern and its breeding. Here's a photo of one just on a little coconut husk. And we published this paper assessing the success of this conservation intervention work a few years ago, and really showed that we saw some increase in hatching success of eggs. So 65% of eggs in a coconut husk hatch versus 52% hatching in a natural nest just on a branch. And of the eggs that hatched, this is where the big impact happened. 92% in a coconut husk fledged. It was only 61% on a natural branch fledged. And this meant that overall breeding success was double in an artificial nest than on a natural nest. So small conservation interventions can assist with breeding success of even species like seabirds. We also just coupled on with the thermoregulation and climate change impact, investigated the development of thermoregulation, a chick's ability to control its own body temperature over the course of its development in the nest. And you do that by measuring a cloacal temperature, like indicated in this picture. Yeah, that's a bird that's actually in a cup being weighed. So we're just getting the weight of an adult incubating bird, and you just put a little cloacal probe in and record the temperature while we're doing that. And we do the same with the chicks throughout the course of their development. And here's just a graph for lesser noddies, and you can see the sort of gradual increase in body temperature as they get closer to fledgling. Fledgling weight is about 110 grams. And so you can see from about 80 grams, they start being able to thermoregulate and control their own body temperature. And so it's before that, it's the first 60 grams of growth that is critical from a disturbance point of view. You don't want those incubating or brooding birds being chased off the chicks, and the chicks being exposed to these harsh environmental conditions. And we published that as well in a thermal journal as well. And then just some of the work we did, which was really quite cool. We used a thermal imaging camera. So for example, if you look at a photo of this brown noddy nesting out exposed on the open on the ground, and you look at it through the thermal camera, you can see that its feather surface temperature is up around 65 degrees Celsius. Now, a bird's internal body temperature is 42 degrees Celsius, a little bit higher than us as mammals, 37.5 degrees. But you can see the extreme heat load that these incubating birds are put under. And so we're still working on the noddy data. We haven't published that yet. What we have published is data from tropic birds. And thanks to the thermal imaging work, we know now that tropic birds definitely incubate with their feet rather than with their bodies. So they don't develop a brood patch like other birds. Normal birds would lose the feathers on their belly. They would increase blood supply with microcapillaries around that part of the belly, form a hot bare patch of skin called a brood patch, which they put in close contact with the eggs. Tropic birds don't do that. They actually put their feet underneath the eggs. They increase blood supply to their feet, and they heat the eggs from underneath. And you can see that just from the data that we collected with the thermal imaging camera. Very cool and very fun to do work like that. We do long-term monitoring, not only of breeding success, but also on individual birds. We try and band as many birds as possible. In this photo, you can see a family of audubons or tropical shearwaters, mom, dad, and a chick, which we were able to ring all together at one time. And the long-term ringing is crucial for a lot of the work we do on the island. So one of the first things I do when a new staff member is put on place, if they are not a qualified ringer, I do an intensive bird ringing training course with them, getting them up to speed to be able to ring independently and make sure that these long-term projects continue. There's a fairy tern getting its ring. And then, yeah, I just wanted to touch on, the global buzz is all about plastic pollution, and even in remote places like the Seychelles, it happens. And we record and have done for, I think, a decade now, in fact, 2 decades, the amount of litter that washes up on the beach every day. And so we published this work a couple of years ago, and it's been very well cited. But if you look at just the scary thing, just in the last 20 years, the amount of beach litter that is washed up, items per meter per day. Back in 2003, there wasn't that much, but now 2023, was even more than what we were recording in 2019. And so there's a reason why it's become a global hype about the plastic problem and how do we deal with reusable plastic and non-reusable plastic. And these single-use items really do have a big impact. Here's a graph to show the type of stuff that washes up. And colleagues of mine that have worked in the Seychelles as long as I have recently did an archipelago-wide study of ocean currents and try to model where most of the Seychelles litter comes from. And unfortunately, a lot of it comes from Asia, Indonesia, India, and places like that. But what I find really interesting whenever we go there, especially on some of the islands and on certain times of the year, 10% of all the litter we collect on the beach on this island, or 9.2%, is footwear and slops, flip-flops. It's actually insane. I mean, Kelly and I did staff training on Kazan Island the once. We did a little beach walk. I think we picked it up 27 flip-flops in one walk. And it was absolutely insane that something like that can predominate your litter. Just touching on some of the other work we do, we're down to the last sort of 10, 13 minutes of the talk. I do staff training for Nature Seychelles on Kazan Island whenever I get the opportunity to do so. So on 4 or 5 occasions, I've gone and provided training for their conservation team and their rangers, their marine rangers. And I love going across. BirdLife as an organization close to my heart. And whenever I can interact with BirdLife partners around the world, I try and do so as much as possible. And just, yeah, I mean, the spectacular nature of having, 60, 70,000 seabirds when I'm there in June or July around you continually. It's an experience that most don't get to appreciate or encounter, but it's really something special, and it's something I try not to take for granted, being able to work on these fantastic birds. I said I don't have too many favorites, but along with the fairy tern and the tropic bird, this little tropical shearwater is definitely one of my favorites. Gorgeous little birds, very dainty, very sweet, kind of the opposite to the big, chunky, boisterous wedge-tailed shearwater. Don't occur in high numbers. We've probably only got a couple of 100 pairs on the island, but really great birds to encounter. We do have bridal terns that breed on the island occasionally as well, and it's really great to see them as well. The pirates of the sky don't breed on the island, the frigate birds, but we do have them continually visit and kind of kleptoparasitize food from the noddies and the fairy terns and the tropic birds as well. So this is a young greater frigate bird. It's mostly juveniles that we get hanging around the island. Sometimes you can get up to 20, 25 just hanging in the sky above the island, seeing who they can rob food from next. A couple of pics just off some of the other terrestrial endemic birds. This is a Seychelles sunbird, stunning little bird. I'm busy working on a book on sunbirds of Southern Africa at the moment. Sunbirds are a group that are really close to my heart. And the Seychelles sunbird is no exception, really cool. And some stage in the future, I definitely want to do some work on these guys. I've got a beautiful little sort of orangey pectoral tuft, and the males have this lovely blue metallic bib. Seychelles Foddy is on 6 islands. 2 of those have been reintroduced. We've got probably between 400 and 450 birds on the island. We also have the introduced alien Madagascan Foddy, which is a little bit smaller. It's the bright red one with the brown wings. And when I first started working on the island, we had a lot more of the Madagascan, a lot less of the Seychelles Foddy. And that was really down to habitat. So the Seychelles Foddy is a forest bird. The Madagascan Foddy is a grassland bird. And so as we've seen that habitat restoration work really come to fruition and start reaching sort of climax vegetation, we've seen a shift in the 2 populations. So the Madagascan, the alien, has decreased, and the Seychelles has increased the endemic species, which is fantastic. I had to pop in a photo of the Seychelles blue pigeon. It's a beautiful bird. and one that gets itself into trouble. It gets intoxicated, feeding on fermenting fruit on the ground, and literally walks around drunk as a skunk, and has to be taken in when the conservation team find them in that state. They've literally got to take them in for 24 hours, do exactly what we would do with a partying teenager, give them electrolytes, get them rehydrated, let them sleep it off, and then let them go again a day or two later. Interestingly, one of the common birds in the forest and even on the beach is common moorhen. And these have colonized the island because cuisine didn't naturally have a freshwater source. And so because we have birds like Seychelles Magpie Robins, and we have giant tortoises, Aldabra giant tortoises, we have individuals that need fresh water, we have certain ponds and watering stations that are put in place for some of the biodiversity. And moorhen have colonized the island from praline, and they're now quite common as a forest bird, which is unusual for me as a South African to think of it as a forest bird. And then just finishing off with a couple of photos of some of the turtle work. This is a hawksbill turtle returning to the ocean after laying a nest. We do very intensive work on the hawksbill turtles. So every single nesting attempt is recorded. We count every single egg that's laid. The team are amazing. Turtle season is a really difficult period of time work-wise for them. This is an intern that I had on the island a few years ago that was assisting with the work. 2 interns, a South African and a Belgian student. Both spent time with me in South Africa as interns as well. And then nests that are laid in high-risk areas. So high risk from either flooding, so below the sort of contour of the flood lines. And we know that because we map the beach every single month. And then also high risk from crab predation. There's certain parts on the beach where you will get 100% of your eggs predated by crabs if you leave that nest in place. We relocate those nests to a turtle hatchery that we started developing a number of years ago. We've now had 5 years where we've used this turtle hatchery to put these high-risk nests and relocate them. We have exceptionally high success rates of hatchings from these nests, and it means we're able to put so many more turtle hatchlings into the ocean. So nests are put in and then fenced just before hatching, so that the nestlings can be transported onto the beach and released back into the ocean like they would normally do from a normal nest. It's a special group of animals to work with, and I've become a bit of a sort of turtle nut. I really enjoy them and I love working on them. The other large reptile that we have on the island is the Aldabra giant tortoise, and they really are fantastic animals. We've got about 75 of them on the island. Every individual is microchipped and known, and we're doing some work on them as well. And there's a photo of my son, Jesse. Some of the older individuals have been in captivity for many, many years, and they actually just enjoy a good scratch and a good tickle now and then. So it's quite bizarre in encountering these large, majestic animals, some of which the oldest tortoise on the island is 140 years old. So yeah, amazing to work with them. And that brings me to the end of the talk. So Lynette, I'm going to hand back over to you and see if anyone's still awake and has any questions for us.
Mark, that was really fantastic. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. It was such a positive talk that you gave, showing the island in the 60s compared to the island now. Wow, what an incredible difference. And it's good to know that, you know, there's so many people working on, you know, the conservation of the birds and the tortoises and turtles and that. Fantastic. Yeah. I think we do have a question. Let me just check. Can't seem to get into the chat box.
Nice. I can see it. Mike asked the question. He said, do
Yes.
those two rare birds migrate between the islands? So it's a very good question, Mike. So I'll deal with the warbler first. There's no record of the warblers moving between islands ever. There's never been an example of that. The Seychelles Magpie Robin is interesting. There was one recorded movement of a Kazan bird that flew the 2 kilometers across to Cuisine. But that was a single example and has never been repeated. And so we don't suspect that there's lots of natural movement between the islands, unfortunately.
Just a question I'd like to ask, these like weather systems that pass through, do they not sort of push some of the birds out into the ocean? You know,
No,
like you often get birds landing in Kruger that should be on an island, you know?
No, exactly. Look, to be honest, we don't know, but for example, like the magpie robins, we know every individual on the island. And it's not often that they go completely missing. So I suspect, you know, tropical island birds have evolved in tropical island environments, and they a lot less susceptible to be washed away or washed out to weird spaces like seabirds stuck in a cyclone. They can hunker down in the undergrowth, they can go into a nest box, they can, you know, do whatever. Yeah.
Okay, and then Patricia asks, why do noddies have such long toes, especially the middle toe?
Yeah, Pat, great question. And I'm just trying to quickly zoom back to one of my noddy photos. I've never noticed an exceptionally long toe on a noddy. I'll have to look into that for you, and we can have a chat. Because yeah, I've never noticed that. I'll go and have a look at some noddy photos.
And Leonie says, thanks, Mark and hosts, for this interesting webinar. I think it was Cuisine that I visited on a day trip from Praslin in 2009. Wish I had paid closer attention to their beautiful birds then. And then there were nesting tropic birds, and those fairy terns are special. I think Leonie said she hadn't been started birding then when she went, so I think she's due for a trip then, Leonie.
Definitely. So that was Kazan that she was on, the island just next door between us and Praslin. It's the one owned by Nature Seychelles, and there's day trips that happen on a regular basis there from Praslin. Beautiful spot. Yeah. A lot more mosquitoes there, and a little bit less luxury than what I get spoiled with on Cuisine. But a lovely spot to go.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? Please pop them into the chat box. Jeannie and Tom say thanks for the wonderful talk. Any more questions before we wrap up? It looks like that's it. No, thanks, Mark. That was really very interesting. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. A really good talk, and I think we must make it known when we put it on YouTube. I think a lot of people that didn't manage to make it tonight, it's a little bit out of our normal third Thursday of the month time frame.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Thanks once again. And thanks for everyone for attending. See you next month. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.